Rebecca always chose the corner table at the coffee shop, not because the lighting was better there or because it was quieter. She chose it because from that spot, she could see everyone without anyone really noticing her watching. This had become her way of moving through the world, observing life rather than fully living it. At 34, Rebecca had perfected the art of being invisible. She worked at the downtown library where her days were filled with the gentle sounds of turning pages and whispered conversations. Her co-workers knew her as the woman who always had the right book recommendation, who never forgot to water the office plants and who brought homemade cookies on birthdays. But they didn't really know her at all. Rebecca liked it that way. It felt safer. Every morning she would arrive at work exactly 15 minutes early, unlock the heavy wooden doors of the old library, and breathe in the familiar smell of aged paper and dust. The building had been there for over 100 years, and sometimes Rebecca felt like she was just another piece of furniture that had found its permanent place among the stacks. Her routine never changed. She would check the returned books, organize the new arrivals, and spend her lunch break reading in the small garden behind the building. Her co-workers would sometimes invite her to join them at the nearby restaurant, but Rebecca always had a polite excuse ready: a book she needed to finish, an appointment she couldn't miss, a headache that required quiet. The truth was, Rebecca was afraid of what people might discover if they looked too closely, not because she had done anything wrong, but because of what she used to be, what she used to dream of becoming. 15 years ago, Rebecca had been a different person entirely. Back then, her name appeared on concert programs and competition announcements. Back then, her fingers could make a piano sing in ways that brought audiences to their feet. She had studied at one of the most famous music schools in the country, surrounded by other young musicians who lived and breathed music the way most people breathed air. But that was before everything fell apart. Rebecca rarely allowed herself to think about those days. When memories tried to surface, she would push them down by reorganizing her bookshelves or deep cleaning her small apartment. She had become an expert at keeping busy enough that the past couldn't catch up with her. Her apartment reflected her new life perfectly. It was neat, quiet, and completely ordinary. The only hint of her former self was hidden in the back of her bedroom closet, a box of sheet music and old programs that she couldn't bring herself to throw away but couldn't bear to look at either. She had trained herself to walk past pianos without feeling anything. When she heard music playing in stores or restaurants, she would focus on something else: counting ceiling tiles, reading signs, making mental grocery lists. Anything to avoid being pulled back into that world that had once meant everything to her. Her family didn't understand why she had given up music so completely. Her mother still asked during their monthly phone calls whether she was playing anything these days. Rebecca always changed the subject quickly, asking about her mother's garden or her father's fishing trips instead. It was easier than explaining that some dreams hurt too much to hold on to. At work, Rebecca had built a reputation as someone reliable and quiet. She volunteered for the tasks that others found boring: cataloging, inventory, organizing the archives. These jobs suited her perfectly because they required focus but not creativity. They kept her mind busy without asking her to reach for anything that might remind her of who she used to be. The other librarians were kind to her, but they had learned not to ask too many personal questions. Rebecca had a way of deflecting that was so gentle and polite that people didn't realize they were being kept at a distance until much later. She would smile and nod and ask questions about their lives instead, becoming an expert listener who rarely shared anything meaningful about herself. Sometimes, late at night in her quiet apartment, Rebecca would catch herself humming. The melodies would slip out before she could stop them, usually while she was washing dishes or folding laundry. When she realized what she was doing, she would stop immediately, as if the music might somehow escape and give away her secret. She had convinced herself that this life was enough, that being safe and invisible was better than taking risks that might lead to pain. She told herself that not everyone was meant to chase big dreams, and that there was dignity in finding peace in simple, ordinary things. But deep down, in a place she tried not to examine too closely, Rebecca knew she was hiding, not just from other people, but from herself. She had built walls so high and so thick that sometimes she wondered if the person she used to be was still alive inside them, or if that version of herself had simply faded away from lack of use. The library became her sanctuary and her prison at the same time. Between those walls, she was competent and needed. She helped people find the books they were looking for, recommended stories that might transport them to other worlds, and maintained the quiet order that allowed others to think and dream and discover. Rebecca had made peace with being the person who helped others find what they were looking for, even though she had stopped looking for anything herself. She had accepted that some people were meant to be in the background, supporting the stories of others rather than living their own. What she didn't know was that sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes the very thing we run from finds a way to chase us down, not to hurt us, but to remind us who we really are, underneath all the layers of protection we've built. Rebecca's carefully constructed world of silence and safety was about to be shaken by something she never saw coming, a moment that would force her to choose between the comfortable prison she had built and the terrifying possibility of being truly seen again. But for now, she was still the quiet woman in the corner, watching life happen around her, unaware that her biggest test was just around the corner. The invitation to the holiday party came on a bright yellow piece of paper that someone had slipped under Rebecca's office door. She almost threw it away without reading it. These kinds of social events always made her uncomfortable, but something about ignoring a direct invitation felt too rude, even for someone who had mastered the art of polite avoidance. Annual library staff holiday celebration, the paper announced in cheerful red letters. Join us for dinner, drinks, and fun at Romano's restaurant. Friday, December 15th, 6 p.m. Come hungry and ready to celebrate another great year. Rebecca stared at the invitation for a long moment, already forming excuses in her mind. She could say she wasn't feeling well. She could claim she had family visiting from out of town. She could simply not show up and apologize on Monday morning, explaining that something unexpected had come up. But then she thought about her coworkers. They had always been kind to her, even though she kept them at a distance. Linda, the head librarian, had covered for her when she'd been sick with the flu last month. David, who worked in the children's section, always saved her the best donuts when someone brought them in. Even Carol, who could be a bit much sometimes, had gone out of her way to help Rebecca learn the new computer system. Maybe she owed them this much. Maybe she could go for an hour, eat dinner, make pleasant conversation, and then slip out early with a believable excuse about being tired. Rebecca spent the rest of the week dreading Friday evening. She changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a simple black dress that wouldn't draw attention. She practiced small talk in her bathroom mirror, rehearsing safe topics like the weather and how busy the holiday season always was at the library. Romano's restaurant was the kind of place that had been family-owned for generations. The walls were covered with old photographs, and the tables were mismatched. But the food was good, and the atmosphere was warm. Rebecca had eaten there a few times over the years, always alone with a book, always sitting at the small table by the window. When she arrived, her coworkers had already pushed several tables together to create one long dining area. The conversation was loud and cheerful, fueled by the wine that Carol had insisted they order for the table. Rebecca took a seat at the far end, close enough to participate but positioned so she could make an easy exit if needed. The dinner was actually pleasant. Rebecca found herself relaxing slightly as she listened to Linda tell funny stories about difficult patrons and David share updates about his daughter's soccer team. She even contributed a few comments of her own, though she was careful to keep them brief and focused on work-related topics. As the evening progressed, the wine continued to flow and the conversation became louder and more animated. Rebecca nursed a single glass of water, watching her coworkers transform into more relaxed versions of themselves. Linda laughed harder than Rebecca had ever seen her laugh. David told jokes that were actually funny. Even serious Mr. Thompson from the reference desk seemed to be enjoying himself, but it was Carol who had clearly had the most to drink. Her cheeks were flushed pink, and she was gesturing more dramatically with each story she told. Rebecca noticed that Carol's attention kept drifting around the restaurant, as if she was looking for entertainment beyond their table conversation. That's when Carol spotted the piano. It was sitting in the corner of the restaurant, an old upright that had probably been there for decades. The wood was dark and worn, and several of the keys had that yellowed look that comes from years of use. A small sign on top read, "Feel free to play, but please keep it appropriate for family dining." "Oh my goodness, look at that," Carol exclaimed, pointing toward the piano with her wine glass. "How cute is that? I bet it's been sitting there collecting dust for years." "The owner's grandfather used to play it every Friday night," Linda offered. "Back in the 1980s, I think. Now it's mostly just decoration." Carol's eyes lit up with the kind of mischievous expression that Rebecca had learned to recognize and fear. It was the same look Carol got when she suggested team-building exercises, or group outings that made Rebecca want to hide under her desk. "We should get someone to play something," Carol announced, her voice carrying across not just their table but several nearby ones as well. "Come on, it's a party. Someone here must know how to play piano." The table went quiet for a moment as everyone looked around at each other. Rebecca felt her stomach drop, hoping desperately that someone else would volunteer so the attention would move away from their group entirely. "I took lessons when I was 7, David offered weakly, "but I can barely remember Mary Had a Little Lamb." "I'm strictly a radio listener," Linda laughed. "Don't have a musical bone in my body." Carol's gaze continued to sweep around the table, clearly not ready to give up on her idea. The wine had made her bold, and Rebecca could see that she was the type of person who, once she got an idea in her head, wouldn't let it go easily. "What about you, Rebecca?" Carol asked suddenly, her attention landing on the one person who had been hoping to stay invisible. "I bet you're hiding some secret talent. You're always so mysterious about everything." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks as every eye at the table turned to her. This was exactly the kind of attention she had spent years learning to avoid. Her heart started beating faster, and she could feel that familiar urge to make an excuse and flee. "Oh no," Rebecca said quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded more nervous than casual. "I'm definitely not musical. I can barely whistle a tune properly." But Carol was not easily deterred, especially with wine boosting her confidence. She leaned forward with a grin that was both friendly and challenging at the same time. "Come on, don't be so modest," Carol pressed. "I bet you could at least play Happy Birthday or something simple. It would be fun. Live a little." "Really, I can't," Rebecca insisted. But she could see that Carol was getting that determined look that meant she wasn't going to drop the subject easily. "You know what I think?" Carol said, her voice getting louder and more theatrical. "I think Rebecca is one of those people who pretends she can't do things but is actually secretly talented at everything. Come on, prove me wrong. Just play one song." The other people at nearby tables had started to notice the conversation, and Rebecca could feel their curious eyes on her as well. This was turning into exactly the kind of public spectacle that she had nightmares about. "I really can't play piano," Rebecca repeated, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Carol stood up suddenly, swaying slightly as the wine affected her balance. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," she announced to the entire restaurant. "My friend Rebecca here says she can't play piano, but I think she's just being shy. What do you all think? Should we encourage her to give it a try?" A few people at other tables started clapping and calling out encouragement. Rebecca felt trapped, surrounded by well-meaning people who had no idea they were asking her to tear open wounds that had never properly healed. The moment stretched out like a challenge hanging in the air, waiting for Rebecca to decide who she was going to be. Rebecca felt like she was watching herself from outside her own body. The restaurant had gone from comfortably noisy to uncomfortably quiet, with all eyes focused on her. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, so loud she was certain everyone else could hear it too. Carol was still standing, grinning with that wine-fueled confidence that made her oblivious to Rebecca's obvious discomfort. Other diners had turned in their chairs to watch what would happen next. Even the waitstaff had slowed down their work to see if the shy woman at the corner table would actually get up and play. "Come on, Rebecca," Carol said again, this time extending her hand as if to pull her from her chair. "It's just for fun. Nobody's expecting a concert or anything. Just play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and we'll all clap and move on." Rebecca's mouth had gone completely dry. She reached for her water glass with a hand that was visibly shaking and took a small sip, trying to buy herself time to think. Every instinct she had developed over the past 15 years was screaming at her to make an excuse and leave, fake a headache, claim she had an emergency at home, anything to escape this moment. But something else was happening inside her chest. Something she hadn't felt in years. It started as a tiny flutter like a butterfly trying to wake up after a long sleep. It was anger, she realized. Not at Carol, who was just trying to have fun, but at herself. At the way she had been living. At the way she had let fear make her smaller and smaller until she was barely there at all. I really don't think this is a good idea, Linda said gently, seeming to sense Rebecca's distress. Maybe we should just order dessert instead. But Carol was too excited to be stopped now. Oh, come on, don't be such a party pooper. Rebecca, I promise nobody here is going to judge you. Look around, we're all friends here. Half of us are too tipsy to remember anything anyway. Rebecca looked around the table at her co-workers. David was nodding encouragingly, but she could see concern in his eyes. Mr. Thompson looked like he wished he was anywhere else. Linda was clearly trying to think of a way to rescue her. But it was Carol's face that struck her the most. Despite the whine and the pushiness, there was something genuine in her expression. She really did think she was helping Rebecca break out of her shell. If only she knew what shell she was asking her to break out of. Rebecca stood up slowly, and the restaurant went even quieter. She could hear the soft jazz music playing over the speakers, the gentle clink of silverware from tables where people were still eating, the distant sound of traffic outside. Everything felt heightened, like her senses had been turned up to their maximum setting. Okay, she said quietly, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I'll try. The walk to the piano felt like it took forever. Each step brought back memories she had spent years trying to forget. The weight of sitting at a piano bench, the feel of keys under her fingers, the way music could pour out of her like water from a broken dam. The old upright piano looked even more tired up close. The bench was wobbly, and several of the keys stuck slightly when she pressed them to test them. Someone had placed a few fake flowers on top, and there were water rings on the wood from years of people setting drinks down carelessly. Rebecca sat down and immediately felt 15 years disappear. Her body remembered this position. Back, straight, feet flat on the floor, hands curved in the proper shape. It was like putting on an old coat that still fit perfectly. She could hear Carol saying something encouraging behind her, but the words sounded far away and muffled. All of her attention was focused on the keyboard in front of her. 88 keys, some slightly yellowed, some with small chips in the ivory, but still capable of making music. For a moment, she considered playing something safe. Happy Birthday, like Carol had suggested. Or maybe Chopsticks, something that would satisfy the crowd's expectations without revealing too much of herself. She could play something simple, accept the polite applause, and go back to her table. Back to her safe, quiet life. But her hands wouldn't cooperate with that plan. Instead, her fingers found their way to a chord she knew as well as her own name. D-flat major, but with a haunting minor note added that gave it weight and sadness. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece she had performed countless times in her previous life. A piece that had once been as natural to her as breathing. She pressed the first note. The sound that came out of the old piano was richer than she had expected. It wasn't the pristine tone of the concert grand she used to practice on, but it had character. It had warmth. It filled the restaurant with a single pure note that seemed to hang in the air like a question waiting to be answered. The effect on the room was immediate and startling. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. Even the background jazz music seemed to fade away, as if the speakers themselves were listening. Rebecca felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, opening. Like a door that had been locked for too long finally being allowed to swing wide. She held that first note longer than the music required, partly because the sound was so beautiful she didn't want to let it go, and partly because she knew that once she played the second note, there would be no going back. She would be committed to the piece, committed to revealing herself in a way she hadn't done in 15 years. Behind her, she could hear Carol's voice, much quieter now. "Oh my God," she was whispering. "Did you hear that? That's not what I was expecting." Rebecca closed her eyes and let her fingers find the second note, then the third. The melody began to unfold, tentative at first, like someone learning to walk again after a long illness. But with each note, her confidence grew. Her muscle memory awakened. Her hands remembered what they were born to do. The restaurant had become so quiet that she could hear people breathing. She could hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator behind the bar. She could hear her own heart, which had stopped, racing and was now beating in time with the music. This was the moment she had been avoiding for 15 years. The moment when she would have to choose between the safety of invisibility and the terrifying, exhilarating risk of being truly seen. She chose to be seen. Her hands spread across the keys with growing confidence, and the music began to flow from the old piano like it had been waiting all its life for someone who could unlock its voice. Rebecca felt tears starting to form in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being herself again. There was no going back now. With each note, she was demolishing the walls she had built around her heart. With each phrase, she was becoming the person she used to be, the person she had always been. Underneath all the fear and hiding, the butterfly in her chest spread its wings and began to fly. What happened next was something no one in Romano's restaurant would ever forget. Rebecca's fingers began to move across the keys with a fluidity that seemed impossible. The hesitant woman who had been reluctantly pushed toward the piano just moments before had transformed into someone completely different. Her hands danced across the keyboard like they were having a conversation with the music itself. The Chopin piece unfolded in waves of emotion, gentle at first, like someone whispering a secret, then building into something more urgent and passionate. The old piano, which had probably never been played properly in decades, suddenly sounded like it belonged in a concert hall. Every note was crystal clear, every phrase perfectly shaped. Carol's mouth fell open. She had been expecting something like, "Mary had a little lamb," played with one finger. What she was hearing instead was professional-level classical music being performed by the quiet woman who sorted books for a living. She looked around the table at her other co-workers, all of whom wore the same expression of complete shock. Linda was staring at Rebecca with wide eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. "I've worked with her for 5 years," she whispered to David. 5 years and I had no idea. David just shook his head slowly, unable to process what he was witnessing. The woman who barely spoke during staff meetings was pouring her soul out through a piano that most people would have assumed was just decoration. But it wasn't just their table that was transfixed. The entire restaurant had fallen under the spell of Rebecca's playing. A family at the corner table had stopped eating completely, the parents holding hands while their young daughter listened with wonder written across her face. An elderly couple near the window was swaying slightly to the music, lost in memories of their own. The waitstaff had stopped moving. Antonio, the restaurant owner, had emerged from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway, a dish towel still in his hands. His grandfather had bought that piano in 1962, and Antonio had grown up listening to his grandfather play it every Friday night. He hadn't heard it sound this beautiful since he was a child. Rebecca was completely lost in the music now. 15 years of silence were pouring out of her fingers. All the songs she had never played, all the emotions she had kept locked away, all the dreams she had convinced herself to forget. Everything was flowing through this one piece. Her technique was flawless, but it was more than that. She wasn't just playing the notes correctly, she was telling a story. The music spoke of longing and loss, of beauty discovered and then hidden away, of a heart that had learned to beat quietly but had never stopped beating. Tears were flowing down her cheeks now, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were closed and she was swaying slightly with the rhythm. This wasn't performance, this was confession. This was 15 years of suppressed truth finally being set free. The piece moved into its most dramatic section, where Chopin's genius really shines. Rebecca's hands flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision, creating cascades of notes that seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant. The music built to emotional peaks that left listeners breathless, then dropped to whisper quiet passages that made everyone lean forward to catch every note. A young man at a nearby table had pulled out his phone and was recording, but he wasn't doing it for social media. He was studying music at the local college, and he knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just good playing. This was artistry of the highest level. "Who is she?" he whispered to his girlfriend. "I have no idea," she whispered back to him, "but she's incredible." Mr. Thompson, who had always thought of Rebecca as nice but unremarkable, felt something shift in his understanding of human nature itself. How many people, he wondered, were walking around with hidden depths like this? How many quiet souls were carrying secret magnificence? As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Rebecca's playing became even more intense. Her whole body was involved, now leaning into the dramatic moments, pulling back for the gentle ones. She had become one with the music in a way that only comes from years of dedicated practice and natural talent. The final section of the ballade is both triumphant and heartbreaking, and Rebecca played it with an emotional honesty that reached into the chest of everyone listening. Some people were crying without even understanding why. Others felt their hearts racing as if they were experiencing something life-changing. Carol was no longer the cheerful, slightly drunk woman who had pushed Rebecca toward the piano. She was sitting in stunned silence, realizing that her simple desire for party entertainment had uncovered something profound. She felt honored to have witnessed this moment, but also somehow responsible for it, as if she had accidentally discovered buried treasure. The restaurant had filled up more during Rebecca's performance as word somehow spread that something special was happening. People from the bar next door had wandered over. A few folks walking by on the street had been drawn in by the music floating through the open door. Rebecca played the final, lingering notes of the piece with such tenderness that it felt like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. The last note hung in the air for what seemed like forever and then faded into complete, absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence stretched on as if the entire room was afraid that any sound might break the spell of what they had just experienced. Rebecca slowly opened her eyes and looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. For a moment she seemed surprised to find herself at a piano, as if she had forgotten where she was. Then reality began to creep back in, and she remembered that she was not alone. She turned around slowly to face the restaurant, and what she saw took her breath away. Every single person was staring at her. Some had tears in their eyes. Others looked like they had just witnessed a miracle. The silence was so complete that she could hear the wall clock ticking behind the bar. Then, from somewhere in the back of the restaurant, one person began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by another, then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause that was so enthusiastic it shook the windows. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering and calling out words of amazement. The young music student was shaking his head in disbelief. The elderly couple was wiping away tears. Antonio was beaming like his grandfather had just walked back into the room. But it was Carol's face that Rebecca focused on. Her co-worker was crying openly now, her hand pressed to her heart. "Rebecca," she said when the applause finally began to die down. "I don't understand. Where did you learn to play like that?" Rebecca stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs, feeling like she was waking up from a 15-year dream. She looked around at all these faces, co-workers, strangers, families, couples, all of them looking at her with wonder and respect, and something that looked like love. For the first time in 15 years, Rebecca felt truly seen. And instead of wanting to run away and hide, she found herself smiling. The video changed everything. Rebecca had no idea that the young music student had recorded her performance until 3 days later, when Linda knocked on her office door with her laptop in hand and an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. "You need to see this," Linda said quietly, setting the laptop down on Rebecca's desk. The video was titled, "Hidden Talent. Librarian's Stunning Piano Performance Brings Restaurant to Tears." It had been posted just 2 days ago, but the view count was already climbing toward 50,000. Rebecca watched herself on the screen, seeing her performance from the audience's perspective for the first time. She barely recognized the woman in the video. The person playing piano looked confident, passionate, completely alive. This wasn't the quiet, invisible librarian she had trained herself to be. This was someone Rebecca remembered but thought she had lost forever. The comments, Linda said softly, scrolling down. You should read the comments. They filled the screen in an endless stream. People sharing their own stories about hidden dreams and forgotten talents. Music teachers asking if she gave lessons. Local venue owners wondering if she would perform at their establishments. Former classmates from her music school days reaching out after years of silence. But it was one comment that made Rebecca's breath catch in her throat. It was from Professor Williams, her old composition teacher from the conservatory. The same professor who had given her the harsh critique that had sent her running from music 15 years ago. This is Rebecca Chen, the comment read. I taught her at the conservatory years ago. I've been wondering what happened to one of the most gifted pianists I ever had the privilege to work with. Seeing this video fills my heart with joy. The world needs your music, Rebecca. Please don't hide it anymore. Rebecca stared at the screen, reading the comment over and over. The words that had once torn her down were being replaced by words that lifted her up. The professor who had seemed so stern and impossible to please was publicly calling her gifted. He's right, you know, Linda said gently. About not hiding anymore. That performance, Rebecca, I've never seen anything like it. You have a gift. That's too beautiful to keep to yourself. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca's phone rang constantly. Local coffee shops wanted to know if she would play during their evening hours. The community center asked if she would consider teaching piano lessons. A wedding planner reached out about playing for ceremonies. But the call that surprised her most came from a woman named Helen, whose daughter had been in the restaurant that night. My little girl hasn't stopped talking about you, Helen explained. She's been begging for piano lessons ever since she heard you play. She keeps saying she wants to learn to make music that makes people cry happy tears just like you did. Rebecca found herself saying yes before she even realized she had made a decision. Teaching had never been part of her plan, but something about this little girl's enthusiasm sparked something warm in her chest. The first lesson was scheduled for a Saturday morning at Rebecca's apartment. She had finally opened the box in her bedroom closet, pulling out the old sheet music and dusting off memories along with the pages. She had even bought a small digital piano, something she could never have imagined doing just a month before. 8-year-old Lucy arrived with her mother and a notebook decorated with musical notes drawn in crayon. Her eyes were bright with excitement as she bounced on her toes. Are you really the piano lady from the restaurant? Lucy asked breathlessly. I suppose I am, Rebecca said, and realized it was the first time she had claimed that identity out loud. The lesson went better than Rebecca had dared to hope. Lucy was eager and focused, hanging on every word. But more importantly, teaching felt natural to Rebecca in a way that surprised her. She found herself remembering why she had fallen in love with music in the first place, not for the performance or the recognition, but for the pure joy of creating something beautiful. Word spread quickly through the small community. By the end of the month, Rebecca had 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 68. Her apartment became filled with music again, different songs floating through the rooms at different times of day. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. Rebecca found herself walking differently, sitting up straighter, making eye contact when she spoke. The woman who had spent 15 years trying to disappear was finally learning how to be seen again. She started performing regularly at Antonio's restaurant, which had added live piano music with Rebecca to their Friday night advertising. The owner had insisted on paying her, even though she would have played for free just for the joy of it. But the biggest change came when she finally called her parents. Mom, she said when her mother answered the phone, I have something to tell you. Is everything all right, sweetheart? Her mother asked, immediately concerned. I'm playing piano again. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Rebecca wondered if the call had dropped. Then she heard her mother crying softly. "Oh, Rebecca," her mother whispered. "I've been hoping for this day for 15 years. Your father is going to be so happy. We never understood why you stopped, but we knew how much it meant to you." Rebecca found herself planning her first trip home in 3 years, eager to play for her parents and to finally explain what had happened all those years ago. The shame she had carried for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by excitement about the future. The library job became something different, too. Instead of hiding behind the book stacks, Rebecca found herself connecting with patrons in new ways. She recommended books about music to aspiring musicians. She helped organize a monthly music and literature program where local musicians performed pieces inspired by famous books. Carol, who had become something of a local celebrity herself, as the woman who discovered Rebecca, never stopped apologizing for pushing so hard that night. But Rebecca always told her the same thing. Sometimes the best gifts come in unexpected packages. 6 months after that night at Romano's, Rebecca received a letter that made her hands shake as she opened it. It was from the dean of her old music conservatory, offering her a position as a guest lecturer for their summer program. "We would be honored to have you share your knowledge and passion with our students," the letter read. "Your video has been watched by thousands of our alumni, and many have reached out to say how inspiring it was to see someone return to music after time away." Rebecca looked around her apartment, now filled with sheet music and the sounds of students practicing. She thought about the quiet, invisible woman she had been just months before, and marveled at how much life could change in a single moment of courage. She picked up her phone and called the conservatory to accept their offer. That evening, as she played her regular Friday night set at Romano's, Rebecca looked out at the audience and smiled. Some faces were familiar now, regulars who came specifically to hear her play. Others were new, drawn by word of mouth or the video that continued to circulate online. But they were all there for the same reason: to hear music played with honesty and passion by someone who had finally learned that hiding your gifts doesn't protect you. It just makes the world a little less beautiful. Rebecca finished her set with the same Chopin piece that had started it all, and as the final notes faded into applause, she knew she would never hide again.